Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk about the rapidly escalating situation in the Middle East as the United States, Israel and Iran have begun their military action again, and the ceasefire now looks to be completely dead in the water. The USA has carried out 3 consecutive nights of major strikes against Iran. Iran has responded by launching missiles and drones against American facilities and countries across the Gulf region. Commercial vessels and oil tankers have once again been attacked. The Strait of Hormuz has been declared closed by Iran, and the USA is now reinstating its full maritime blockade of the Iranian coastline. But perhaps the most extraordinary development is that Donald Trump has said that the USA will now charge ships a 20% fee for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is particularly controversial because the USA previously condemned Iran for attempting to impose its own charges on exactly the same international waterway. Oil prices, not surprisingly, have responded immediately, with Brent crude jumping almost 10% in a single trading session and is now trading at around about $85 per barrel. Now, as I'm going to show you in this video, this is happening at precisely the moment when the amount of oil travelling through the strait has collapsed, and America's own emergency oil reserves are approaching their lowest levels for more than 40 years. We'll have a look at a couple of interesting graphs for anybody that's been missing the graphs recently. But before we go on any further today, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? Really does help me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. And also, if you've never done it before, you may see a new symbol called hype. Well, hype basically means that this video will be promoted to more people on YouTube. So if you'd like to hit that hype button, then that would really help me with this video and basically raise the profile of the channel. So that's fantastic if you could help me out in that way. Now let's start by talking about why all of the military action has recommenced. The current escalation began after a series of attacks on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. 3 vessels were initially reported to have been struck: the Qatar-owned tanker El Rakayat, the Saudi-flanked tanker Wadian, and the Liberian-flagged Cyprus Prosperity. That was followed by further incidents, including an attack on a Cyprus-flagged container vessel near Oman and strikes against 2 Emirati oil tankers. At least 1 sailor has reportedly been killed, several others have been injured, and another crew member was initially reported as missing. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Organisation has received reports of at least 6 ships being attacked near Oman since the end of June. The USA say these attacks were carried out by Iran and represented a clear violation of the interim ceasefire agreement. In response, the US began another substantial campaign of airstrikes. The latest 5-hour American operation targeted military facilities across Iran, including Bushkir, Chabar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa and Bandar Abbas. These are extremely important locations. Bandar Abbas is Iran's main naval centre on the Strait of Hormuz. Abu Musa is a strategically positioned island near the shipping lanes. Jask and Chabahar provide Iran with access to the Gulf of Oman outside the narrowest part of the strait. The USA says it has now struck hundreds of Iranian targets during the latest round of fighting, including missile launchers, drone facilities, military bases, coastal infrastructure and command centres. Iran, not surprisingly, has retaliated by firing missiles and drones at American facilities across the Middle East. Targets have reportedly included sites in Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan and Oman. Missiles and drones have also been launched towards the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, despite Qatar having played a role in trying to mediate the ceasefire negotiations. Iran says that it has once again closed the Strait of Hormuz and that Washington has no right to determine how the waterway is managed. So although many people still refer to the previous agreement as an interim ceasefire, in practical terms, the ceasefire is no longer functioning. Both sides are carrying out substantial attacks, ships are being hit, and the military campaign is expanding. Israel has not been the main public face of this latest series of American strikes, but it remains central to the wider conflict. The war originally began when the USA and Israel attacked Iran on the 28th of February, targeting Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. Iran then responded with attacks against Israel and against Gulf countries hosting American forces. Israel has also made it clear that it continues to reserve the right to strike Iran if it believes Iran is rebuilding its nuclear program or preparing attacks against Israeli territory. Now, Donald Trump has made another significant threat. He says that America will probably attack a facility known as Pickaxe Mountain. Now, Pickaxe Mountain is located close to the badly damaged Natanz nuclear enrichment facility. It reportedly contains two extremely deep underground tunnel complexes. Experts believe these tunnels may be beyond the reach of even the most powerful bunker-busting bombs currently available to the USA. Donald Trump said America was watching the site closely and warned Iran to be ready. He also said the US will probably give Pickaxe a shot relatively soon. That creates another major question. If conventional bombs can't reach the facility, what exactly will America do that's going to mean that the USA can attack those facilities and destroy them? At the same time, the USA is reinstating its maritime blockade of Iran. The blockade is due to cover all Iranian ports, oil terminals, and coastal areas. It applies to vessels of every nationality attempting to enter or leave the blockade zone. Ships suspected of entering or leaving without American authorization could be intercepted, diverted, or captured. The official warning also states that force could be used against vessels that do not comply. Neutral ships travelling through the strait to destinations outside Iran are not officially included in the blockade, but that doesn't mean that passage is going to be normal or safe. And that brings us to the first graph. So anybody that's been missing my graphs, I wanted to put this one on the screen. This shows the 7-day moving average for barrels of crude oil crossing the Strait of Hormuz. Now, historically, the figure has generally been between 15 and 20 million barrels per day. That is a lot of oil. And if we include crude oil, condensates, and other petroleum liquids, the overall figure is more than 20 million barrels every day. Now, that represents approximately 1/5 of global petroleum consumption passing through a very narrow stretch of water. You can see that throughout 2024 and 2025, the blue line fluctuated but remained broadly within that normal range. Then this war began. The volume suddenly collapsed from roughly 16 million barrels of crude per day to virtually nothing. It remained closed and zero for an extended period before beginning to recover. At one point, the flow did climb back towards 5 or 6 million barrels per day, but that recovery has now reversed sharply. The volume is once again dramatically below anything resembling normal conditions. Separate vessel data shows that crossings fell by approximately 52% between Friday and Monday last week. Only around 14 ships reportedly passed through the strait on Sunday, compared with around 130 ships per day before the war. And this matters because the Strait of Hormuz is not simply another shipping route. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran all depend on it to varying degrees. There are some pipelines that can bypass the strait, but they don't have enough spare capacity to replace all of the oil, liquefied natural gas, and petroleum products that would normally travel through it. So when the line on this graph collapses, the world is not necessarily losing every barrel permanently. Some oil may be delayed, stored, redirected, or shipped through alternative infrastructure, but the market is suddenly operating with a much tighter supply system and far less room for error. Now, the extraordinary fall in the volume of traffic brings us on to the discussion about tolls. Iran has maintained the right to regulate the traffic moving through the strait. It created a new Persian Gulf Strait Authority and demanded that ships register, submit information about their cargoes, and use a northern shipping route closer to the Iranian coastline. The USA has directed ships towards a southern route closer to Oman. Iran is suspected of attacking some of the ships that did not use its preferred route close to the Iranian coast. Iran also floated the possibility of charging ships for passage, and reports suggested that fees potentially were up to $2 million per vessel. The USA strongly opposed that proposal. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, international straits are supposed to allow unimpeded transit. Neither the USA nor Iran has formally ratified that convention, but the principle is widely treated as customary international law. A country can potentially charge a reasonable fee for a specific service, such as providing a pilot or escort, but it can't simply turn on international water into a private toll road and charge whatever it likes. But the USA is now proposing something remarkably similar. President Trump said the United States will become the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz and charge a fee equal to 20% of the cargo passing through it to cover the costs of providing safety and security. That's not 20% of the ship's profit, it actually means 20% of the cargo's value. So that could actually be more than the profit being made by the vessel owner. For a tanker carrying $100 million worth of crude oil, a 20% charge would be $20 million. That would be a staggering additional cost. It's also unclear who would actually pay. Would it be the tanker operator, the oil producer, the buyer, the insurer, or the importing country? In reality, at least part of that cost would ultimately be passed down the supply chain and paid by businesses and ultimately consumers. Iran's foreign minister has already highlighted the contradiction, effectively saying that Donald Trump has now accepted Iran's basic argument that whoever provides security should be compensated, although Iran says 20% is too high. This is a very dangerous precedent, whichever way you look at it. The USA's stated position has traditionally been that freedom of navigation must be protected. But if the US charges a percentage fee per passage, Iran, China, Russia, and other countries could potentially cite that decision when making their own claims over strategically important waterways close to them. And markets now have to price in three separate risks. The first is the risk that Iran physically stops more ships, attacks them. The second is the risk that the US blockade removes Iranian oil from the market. And the third is the possibility that ships which are allowed to move through the strait face enormous security, insurance, escort, and toll costs. That is why oil prices are now surging. Brent crude increased by almost $10 in one session to settle at over $83 per barrel. American West Texas Intermediate rose by more than 9% to just under $80. At the start of this year, the expectation was that Brent crude would be around $60 per barrel throughout the whole of 2026. That's where it was trading in January. Instead, oil has spent a prolonged period at substantially higher levels. That difference is important. A temporary one-day spike in oil can be absorbed, but when oil remains elevated for weeks or months, as we've seen, the costs begin feeding through into the entire economy. Gasoline and diesel become much more expensive at the pumps, jet fuel costs rise, increasing airline costs, shipping companies pay more for bunker fuel and insurance, plastics, chemicals, fertilizer, construction materials, and manufactured goods all become a lot more expensive. Businesses then have a difficult choice: accept lower profits or pass those additional costs on to consumers. That creates another wave of inflation, just as central banks had hoped the previous inflation crisis was under control. Now let's put the second graph on the screen, because I wanted to give you a couple of graphs today. And this one shows the total USA crude oil inventories combining commercial stocks with oil held inside the Strategic Petroleum Reserve by the government. The line begins in the 1980s, when total inventories were a little above 700 million barrels. It then gradually increased, particularly after 2000, eventually rising above 1 billion barrels and reaching around 1.2 billion around the middle of the last decade. But if we look at what's happened since then, the line has fallen sharply and the decline has accelerated since 2020. Total US crude inventories recently dropped to around 731 million barrels, the lowest level since 1984. And that was a long time ago. Maybe you're thinking 1984 wasn't that long ago, but it was actually 42 years ago. Within that total, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve itself has fallen to around 316 million barrels, the lowest level since 1983. The USA announced plans to release 172 million barrels following the outbreak of the war. Almost 100 million barrels have already been removed from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve since the end of February, and combined commercial and government inventories have fallen by around 124 million barrels. These releases have played an important role in preventing oil prices from moving even higher. They're increasing the supply. America and other countries have effectively been filling the supply gap by taking oil out of storage. And that can work for a period of time, but it is not new production, it's borrowed supply. Every barrel released today is one less barrel available for the next crisis. And eventually governments reach a point when they become reluctant to release anymore because the reserve is there for national emergencies, wars, hurricanes, and major interruptions to domestic supply. America can't run its emergency reserve down to zero simply to keep gasoline prices under control globally. That means the buffer protecting the world from another major oil shock is becoming progressively thinner. This is now the fundamental problem facing the global economy. Oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains dramatically below normal levels. Iranian exports are once again facing sanctions and a physical American blockade. Commercial vessels are being attacked. The United States and Iran are exchanging missiles and drones. The USA is threatening another attack on a deeply buried nuclear facility, and the emergency reserves that have helped prevent an even bigger price increase are being depleted rapidly. Markets may still be hoping that another temporary agreement will be reached, but as the first graph we saw today demonstrates, the Strait of Hormuz is no longer a tap that can simply be switched on and off whenever politicians decide they want oil to flow again. Shipping companies need security, crews need to be willing to sail through it, insurers need to provide coverage, mines and damaged infrastructure need to be dealt with, and both Iran and the United States have to agree on who controls the routes and under what conditions. None of those issues have been resolved. So the danger is not merely that oil briefly reaches $85 or $90. The bigger danger is that the world faces a prolonged period of unstable supplies, expensive energy, higher transport costs, and renewed inflation, with fewer emergency barrels available to soften the impact each time the situation deteriorates. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it, but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you see that hype sign, please hit it because it will help this video to be promoted to more people and increase its reach, which would be fantastic. So thank you if you've done that. Thank you also to everybody that's supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you for that support. It genuinely keeps me going. It keeps me focused and making as many videos as I can. So thank you for that support. Just wanted to mention that my new channel, Build and Design, that I set up with my friend Matt, who's a master property builder, is now live. So if you'd like to help us out, we're very early stages. We haven't hit any of the metrics yet. We don't have 1,000 subscribers. We don't have anywhere near 4,000 watch hours. So if you could help us out by watching some of the videos and subscribing, that would be fantastic. If you can click on the Play All playlist, that would go through all the videos. That would be brilliant. So thank you very much if you're helping out in that way.